Today we have Miki Pfeffer speaking with us today. Miki's a unique lady in that she had a second career midlife where she decided that she was going to go and get a master's degree and subsequently a PhD in urban history from the University of New Orleans. Having done that, she then progressed to write two books. One, Ladies and Suffragans, Southern Ladies and Suffragans, which won the Eudora Welty Prize from Mississippi Women's College, which that's quite an accomplishment to have done that. She has a...
He has
Yeah.
the back here.
Oh, we have them in the back. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, so help yourself to that. She also has a second book, A New Orleans Author in Mark Twain's Court. So while I'm not specifically familiar with that book, anything that involves Mark Twain is usually very interesting and humorous, as you probably read throughout your life. Miki's going to speak with us today about a coastal neighbor from the 19th century. Those of you, and most of you, are probably familiar with the New Orleans newspaper, the Times-Picayune. The lady who was the owner, founder, and president of that company during the late 1800s was Eliza Jane Poitevent. And Miki is going to speak to us about that woman's impact on history and our culture in Louisiana and, of course, Mississippi as well. So, Miki, we welcome you.
She grew up in Gainesville, which I understand is the present Stennis property. So it's kind of, whatever was left is kind of a ghost town. And then she went to the female seminary in Amite County. She seemed more interested in boys and poetry than in education. And she started writing nature poetry. Not great poetry, but she did get some pieces published. Newspapers were the likely source for small pieces of written matter by men and women, and she had some of those published. And then she visited New Orleans and visited the Picayune, the Daily Picayune, that had published a few of her poems, and met the editor and the owner, and they hired her. She was the first person on staff at the Daily Picayune, and probably one of the first female staff members, certainly in this area. So she became the literary editor of the Daily Picayune in 1870, and met the owner, of course. You say no sexy, but the next year he divorced his wife, and then the next year Eliza married the owner of the Daily Picayune. His name was Alva Holbrook. So let me go through these. There's the property. There are the signs that you see when you drive by, and there's Eliza Jane there. This is what it looked like at one point. Did anyone know this property looking like this? This is an old postcard. I remember I rented a place, a cottage on Nicholson Avenue and the beach, and I walked down and I thought, this house will last forever, but Katrina took care of that. So here's Eliza Jane, raised in Hancock County. So she marries the owner of the paper, who was 64, and she was 29. And there was a scandal. And it was in the newspaper. And when I went to Colonel Holbrook's Find a Grave site, the whole article about this event is there. His first wife found out. She came to the house that they had been married in previously. The first wife lived there. Sneaked into Eliza Jane's bedroom, tried to shoot her, shot, missed her, and then Eliza Jane and the first wife tussled, and the gun got away, and Eliza Jane ran. Oh, she hit her on the head with a bottle of bay rum before she got away, and then Eliza Jane ran away, and the first wife took an axe and chopped up every piece of furniture and piano and everything in the house. So, and this is on Colonel Holbrook's find a grave site, the article from the Daily Picayune. So, never let it be said that history isn't fun. So, in 1876, Mr. Holbrook dies, and Eliza Jane is left with the paper. And the paper is $80,000 in debt. That's about almost $2.5 million today. So her family wanted her to just sell off what she could and come back home, but she said no, she was going to run the paper. So she called the staff together, all men at that time, and said, I am going to run the paper. I am going to get it out of debt. Anyone who doesn't want to work for a woman, please feel free to go. The rest of you, we're going to make this work. So a few people left. Most of them stayed. One of them who stayed happened to be the business manager, George Nicholson, who was already with the paper. And somehow he acquires, I don't know whether he buys it or acquires it some other way, but he becomes a 25% owner of the paper. But she is the owner and publisher of the Daily Picayune, the only woman running a major daily newspaper in the country at that time. Okay. She makes the Picayune into a family paper. She adds women's issues, a column on Sunday for Women's World and Work, telling about what kind of work women were trying to find around the country. She hires a woman journalist, Catherine Cole, the woman at the bottom there. She's at the top. She adds a society column. And at that time, people weren't anxious to have their names in the paper. They, you were only supposed to have your name in the paper when you were born, maybe when you were married, and when you died, but not your weddings and parties and things. But it became very popular. People really wanted to be in her society column. So that was her contribution to the newspaper. And she also added children's pages and more literature. She announced that the Picayune was not going to be a party organ. It was going to be a paper for the people. Some of the rival papers were more party organs. Party as in political party. She considered journalism a viable career for women, and she considered herself a journalist. Very serious about her work. And here is the masthead on the left that shows her name first, Mrs. E.J. Nicholson, not Mrs. George Nicholson, Mrs. E.J. Nicholson. Even today, some people are still using their husband's name after Mrs. It shows the circulation cost, the events of the day, the weather, and this masthead is from 1885, which was during the time that the Cotton Centennial Exposition was being held in what is now Audubon Park. And so it shows who was in the office, in the Picayune office, on the grounds of the Cotton Centennial, and 2 women's names are listed there. One probably was a secretary, and the woman I showed you a picture of, Catherine Cole, who wrote regular articles and Sunday columns. She considered herself a working woman. She was not a feminist or a suffragist, but she took women seriously. She trusted her editors, but she ran a tight ship. She was dominant without being domineering, but one of her women journalists said she ran the paper with an iron hand and a velvet glove. Nice image. She personally was in demand. People would invite her to go, wanted her to be part of their group, but she only paid attention to her business, the newspaper, and her family. By then, she and George Nicholson had 2 sons, Leonard and York. She would send women journalists to represent the paper rather than go herself. But she had 2 causes that were close to her heart. One of them was the Women's National Press Association that was formed during the Cotton Centennial Exposition because the male press association would not include the women, so they devised their own organization, and they elected her president. So she accepted that. And this weekly newspaper in New Orleans, the mascot, had this derogatory cartoon about women doing the work, of the press. And then there was an accompanying cartoon with men taking care of the babies, and it was not uncommon. The only other personal interest she had outside of the paper was the SPCA, which started in New Orleans, that affiliate, mainly because horses and mules were being abused, who pulled maybe hacks and omnibuses, overworked. She carried it a little far, her love for animals, because that's the paw of her beloved dog, Nat, mounted as a piece of jewelry. It's at the historic New Orleans collection. But this cigarette card from the late 1880s shows how popular she was. I doubt that another woman was on a cigarette card in 1880. I haven't done the research on it, but I bet there wasn't another one. So, as I said, she wanted women to have a chance to be journalists. And so she found this other woman. And if Eliza Jane seemed famous or popular, this other woman surpassed her. Her name was Elizabeth Meriwether Gilmer. Do you know who that is? Do you know what her...
Is that Dorothy Dix?
Exactly. Dorothy Dix. Who has heard of Dorothy Dix? You're old enough to know this. I know.
Etiquette.
Okay. Advice column, yeah. Elizabeth Meriwether Gilmer rented a cottage next door to the Nicholsons down the beach there. And because her husband was unbalanced, couldn't keep a job, and she was on the brink of a nervous breakdown, so her family sent her to Gulfport, Waveland to recuperate. They couldn't afford a fancy resort. Bay St. Louis, Waveland was affordable, so they sent her to recuperate here. And she befriended the two little boys, the Nicholson boys. And she was shy, she was recovering, but Eliza Nicholson kind of took her under her wing, and Elizabeth Gilmer told her some stories. She had been writing stories and having little vignettes published, so she told her one, and Eliza Jane said, write that up. And so she was satisfied with it. She paid her $3 right there. And another career was launched. So Dorothy Dix, she wasn't Dorothy Dix then, she started working at the newspaper. Catherine Cole was about to leave in 1894, and she went and got a job at the Daily Picayune, thanks to Eliza Jane. These other two pictures here are her probably in the 1920s and towards the end of her life. She lived to be 90. And she began her work, this is Lanyap, see, Dorothy Dix is Lanyap for Eliza Jane's story. She started in 1894, she started with the vital statistics, who was born, who died. Then she wrote theater reviews, and the editor said, we need you to write a Sunday column. So what will it be? They thought about it, and they thought, well, she was pretty smart and practical, straightforward, so she wrote an advice column. And soon, letters were coming in for Dorothy Dix. That's when she devised her pseudonym. And she got more and more popular, writing these letters. And the Hearst papers, William Randolph Hearst, got wind of her popularity and wanted to hire her. So she went to work for him in New York. She covered crime court cases. She would find a way to ingrain herself, embed herself by interviewing women who, maybe the wife of whoever was on trial, or maybe the wife had taken an axe and chopped up everything. She found a way to get the story from her angle. So they were really, really happy with her. And she continued to write the advice column. And she did that until 1917, when she got a chance to leave the Hearst papers and go with a syndicate. And by the time she had this long career till 1951, 200 papers were carrying the Dorothy Dix column all over the world. So she had always wanted to, that's 60 million readers she had by that time. She had always wanted to return to New Orleans, and in 1917, when she left New York, she got a chance to go back to New Orleans, and she continued writing her columns thereafter. Hearst hired her at $5,000 a year. Then, by 1923, she was making $50,000 a year. Oh, it's almost $1 million today. 1942, she was making $90,000 a year. $1,741,000 in today's money. She was the largest syndicated. She had the largest salary. She had gotten paid better than Walter Winchell or Drew Pearson. And about 400 to 500 letters a day came in for her. answered, she looked at every letter herself as long as she could. Then she finally had to get a secretary to help her organize. But and many times she would write a letter individually to a person because she didn't want to expose the story in the papers, but she wanted to answer the person. She was astoundingly dedicated, and which meant that she was overworked in a lot of cases. But she was a cultural icon, and even in song, her name was mentioned. And here's a Burma Shave quote. You know Burma Shave. Love and whiskers do not mix. Take our word. Don't take our word. Ask Dorothy Dix. So this is one of her later columns. Her readers didn't like it when she updated her photograph, but she's definitely older there. Her advice mirrored changes in the times. This happens to be a male writer, and about half of the letters came from men, not just women. And it was more than just advice to the lovelorn. She would connect services, she would talk about vocations, she would give parental tips. Even into her late 80s, she was still at her desk. And by that time, she was receiving $900 plus letters a day. And when she died in 1951 on Exposition Boulevard next to Audubon Park, her estate was $2.5 million. She wrote almost to the end. Here she is. Here's her burial place. Her husband disappeared over time. He would go off, get lost, and he's not there. She's there, but he's not there. But she's buried in Metairie Cemetery, which is where Eliza Jane and George and first husband Alva Holbrook is also buried. Not in the same tomb, but in the same cemetery. So just to run through the timeline of the Times-Picayune, Holbrook began as a partner. By 1874, he was sole owner. Eliza Jane Holbrook inherits the paper in 1876. She becomes and remains the owner and publisher of the newspaper. George and Eliza Jane die in 1896, 11 days apart. They both had pneumonia. He dies first, and she dies 11 days later. In 1914, the Daily Picayune merges with the Times-Democrat, becomes the Times-Picayune. And in 1962, Samuel Newhouse and his group purchased the Daily Picayune, and by 1980, he adds the state's item newspapers to the group. In 2012, after Katrina, the paper, he announces that it's only going to be a 3-day-a-week paper with a digital presence planned. And New Orleans was the first major city without a daily newspaper. And then in 2019, the Baton Rouge Advocate buys the Times-Picayune, combines the name, returns it to some print, but it's hard to get delivery in certain areas. And most people use the digital NOLA.com. So two surprising remnants of what we've been talking about today is this guy, Joseph Macos, with 30,000 tubes of free Picayune papers that he got. He saw an ad on Craigslist. An archive needed to get rid of these newspapers, and all you had to do was get them, go get them, wherever they were, and so he did that. And he has this whole run of the Daily Picayune, the Times-Democrat, which was the rival paper, and the Times-Picayune. And he named the archive for Eliza Jane Nicholson. And the second remnant is the Eliza Jane Hotel, which is at 315 Magazine Street. It's a boutique hotel that encompasses 10 warehouses, one of them having been, for a time, the Picayune. So it's a charming hotel. When you get out of the elevator, they have pages of the Picayune for you to see when you get out. And it has a nice atmosphere. So if you visit New Orleans, stay overnight, you might want to try that, or at least go for lunch. I don't get any residuals from that, just saying. So, thank you very much for your attention, and if there's time for questions and you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. There are books in the back. They're $35. I have 10 of them, but I only want to sell 9 if you're interested, because I want to give you one for your shelf there. Yeah. So, yes.
For either one of the ladies, are there any monuments in New Orleans to them?
No,
Shame.
not that I know of, no. No statues. But, any other questions? Yes.
Once she was published in the newspaper, what effect did she have on the staff in terms of bringing more women in? Did that happen immediately? Did it just kind of build over time?
Well, I think it probably happened pretty quickly, because this Catherine Cole had been working for the Times-Democrat at least by about 1874. So she probably, squired her way from the Times-Democrat. She might have been the first, but she was ready to hire women. And women were looking for work that they could either do from home or on a salary, because they needed to help support their families after the Civil War. And, they needed to make money. Yes.
What happened to her 2 sons? They didn't have anything to do with the newspaper?
Well, they were 15 and 13 when both their parents died. I'm not sure what they did, but by 1917, the older son was the publisher of the Times-Picayune, and he's the one who rehired Dorothy Dix when she came back to New Orleans. She was glad about that. Both sons were at the Picayune once they grew. And they're buried in Metairie Cemetery also. There was a hand over here. Oh.
What was her reputation as a poet?
Not great, but, charming little nature poems. There are 1 or 2 longer ones that are regarded a little better. The poetry that was in newspapers was not, it's not in the canon now, it was just a daily poem to read, not necessarily to memorize or end up in a book. Thank you for asking.
For books back here, this is what they look like. So there's 9 of them back here. If somebody wishes to buy one, they're $35 each, or 2 for $80.
It's about the women's department at the Cotton Centennial Exposition, but there's a lot about the newspapers in there, because the newspapers were rivals, and there were weeklies, and there was a French paper and a Spanish paper and a German paper, and there was a lot about newspapers going on. I quote the Picayune continuously in there, so I think you could find it relatable. Yes, sir?
You want to draw when they finish?
Oh, okay. Anyone else?
I want her to draw the ticket because I trust her.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Am I pulling the ticket? Yeah. Thank you very much. I enjoyed being with you. Sorry about the little delay, but delay. Okay. Your ticket is, I'm calling it out, you're calling it out.
Can you read it?
Okay, I can read it.
Okay.
873154.
And we have a winner.
You have it back there?
Thank you very much, Mickey. We appreciate it. Thank you all for